Myth: ringiness from a snare drum is bad, annoying, and needs to be gotten rid of. Truth: ringiness can actually give a snare more body and fullness, and there's actually a trick that you can use that keeps it from being annoying. Hey, if you struggle with snare tuning, especially with ringiness, and your snare just sounds bad to your ear, today's lesson will challenge your thinking on this and provide you with a whole bunch of practical solutions. I was playing at church a couple of weeks ago and I felt like I got my snare sounding awesome. But then 2 songs into the set, it suddenly had this awful ring that I couldn't get rid of. I'll show you why this happened and how we can avoid this as we break down the Ringy Snare myth and the 5 steps you can take today to get the snare sound of your dreams. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out today. I help self-taught beginner drummers know what to practice so they can nail songs and become that drummer that people actually want to have in their band, that people want to jam with. And hey, I want to help you out with this. I have a free gift in the description. It is my Know What to Practice 3-part practice guide for the beginner drummer, for the busy drummer. If you don't have a lot of time, this simple 3-part guide helps you practice all the core stuff that you need to practice every day, even if you just got 30 minutes. If you're practicing these 3 things daily, which are very simple, laid out note for you in this PDF guide, then you will grow like crazy, and you can then practice whatever else you want to, knowing that you've got your core stuff right here in this simple 3-part Know What to Practice guide for busy beginner drummers. So dive in. This is a great way to get started, and it has helped so many students make a ton of progress, sometimes even in very little time. You'd be amazed what you can do with this because it works all of your core skills. Go grab it. Total no-brainer. My free gift to you in the description. All right. Let's dive in today. So the ringy snare myth. Most people think that a ringy snare is annoying. And a ringy snare certainly can be annoying. But the truth is that a ringy snare is only annoying and perceived as annoying when it clashes with the key of the song. And that's kind of the core principle we're getting into today. We're going to talk about a lot of different ways to deal with ring, to reduce ring, how to handle it. But if you do this first thing, the ring just might not bother you. If you have your snare tuned to the key of the song, that ringiness is probably not going to be annoying. So let me show you what I'm talking about. What we're going to do in a second is we're going to cut to a recording I made earlier. You're going to hear my snare, which is tuned roughly to a G. I say roughly because I don't have a tune bot. I'm not getting it like to the exact frequency. Sounds like a G to me. So I have my snare tuned to a G, and you're going to hear it playing along to this piano loop I threw together in Logic. The piano loop is in the key of C. So if you know music, if you're familiar with intervals, that means that my snare is actually ringing at a scale degree 5. So scale degree 5 in the key of the piano loop. But then we're going to change something, and I'm going to play you a second example, the same piano loop, the same snare, but we're going to change something, and you're going to hear how there's a difference in how the snare starts to sound. So this will be pretty interesting. Let's listen to these 2 clips of my snare tuned to a G with 2 different piano loops, and then we'll talk about what we notice here. Let's listen. So what did you notice there? So this snare has a little bit of ring going on, and I was hitting, hard rim shots about like this. So, so there's some ringiness. There's definitely a note coming from the drum. I think it sounds nice, but there's definitely a note. That's even with this on here, which we'll talk about later. The first example, I think it sounds pretty good. It fits really nicely in the key of that piano loop because the snare is a G, the piano loop is in a C, in the key of C. But then the second example, you might have noticed how that one, it's like suddenly the ring felt more apparent. It felt more, sticking out like a sore thumb, kind of awkward, kind of annoying. That's because the key of the second one, instead of the piano loop being in C, it was in C sharp or D flat. So that moving up a half step made the snare note go down a half step in the key of the song, if that makes sense. So previously the snare was scale degree 5, but now if we raise the key of the piano loop up a half step, suddenly now we're flat 5 or sharp 4, which is a pretty awful note to have your snare ringing in the key. So there in the second example, you hear, okay, now the snare is no longer a nice pleasing scale degree 5 where we have a perfect 4th or perfect 5th relationship. It's now a sharp 4 or a flat 5, which is a tritone. Any of you who know music know a tritone is the most dissonant interval, pretty much, I think it is. very dissonant, and so suddenly the snare doesn't sound right. So let's get into some action steps here. Now that you've heard the difference, you might notice listening to recordings of your favorite songs, oh, hey, that ring sounds nice. Oh, it's because it's in the key of the song. Or that doesn't sound nice. Oh, it's because it's not in the key of the song. And so you're going to start noticing this now, and it might just change the way you think about ringiness, where suddenly ringiness isn't annoying anymore, because if it's tuned to a 1, a 4, or a 5 of the song, a lot of times it sounds really nice and it's not bothersome. But if it's tuned to a 7, or if it's a sharp 1 or a sharp 4, or just something really weird, then it just might stick out like a sore thumb, and then it might bother you, and so that's where you need to make some changes. So we'll talk about that. We're going to dive into these 5 practical action steps you can take, and also I'm going to list out 6 songs for you to go check out for examples of snares that are tuned to the keys of the song or not tuned to the key of the song. There's one example I think is a bad snare sound you can go listen to, so we'll talk about that a little later. So here we go, 5 practical action steps for dealing with ring. So the first one is what I just showed you, tune to the key of the song. So I'll give you an example here. Let's say that, okay, we know that my snare is in G. Right before I hit record on this, I recorded that example you just heard. My snare is ringing a G. But let's say our song is in A. That G, which would be flat 7 in A, isn't great. So what if we tune it up to an A? It would also be nice to tune it up to an A because my rack tom is pretty much an A. So let's get the snare tuned up to match the rack tom, which is a 4th above the floor tom. So all of my drums are going to sound nicer together right now if I tune this from a G up to an A. So let's say we need to make that change. If you have a tune bot or one of those fancy, anything that will tell you the pitch of your drum when you hit it, that's fantastic. And if you're new to music and you haven't spent a lot of time doing ear training, you haven't learned a tonal instrument, you don't know intervals, those tools can be really useful for this. And a lot of drum techs use them because it just makes it faster and easier and more consistent. You're not having to rely so much on your ear. So definitely no shame in using tools like that, by all means. I have a piano background. I spent a lot of time in music before even getting into drums, so just doing it by ear makes total sense to me. That's why I'm doing it that way, but you don't have to do the same. It's great practice, though, learning to recognize intervals. What we want to do now is pull out a tuner. This is just the one that's in my Tempo Advanced Metronome app. It doesn't matter what you use, and I'm just going to have it play a note. Here's G. Yeah, it sounds like it's like a hair above a G, but we want to bring it up to an A, right? We're pretending that the key of the song we're about to play is an A. The rack tom is A. It's going to sound better with my toms if I get it up to an A. So here's an A. Boom. So get that note in your head. What we're going to do is find some tuning keys, and we're just going to tune things up a little bit. With your snare, the top head is what's determining the pitch you hear. With toms, the bottom head is what determines the pitch you hear, the note that you hear. With snare, if you have the snare wires on, they're choking out that bottom head, so the primary note that you hear is actually coming from the top head. So we just need to bring our top head up a little bit. I'm not going to go much. Let's just go a tiny bit, but I'm going around with 2 keys at a time, so we're hitting each lug, one across from the other, and then we'll see where we're at here. I'll try to remember where I started. I don't remember if I did those already. And that's going to happen to you over and over again, where you're like, wait, where did I start? Oh, no. And so then if that happens, just check and make sure it's still in tune with itself, which is something we could talk about more in depth in another lesson. But if we put a finger here in the middle and tap around, that sounds fine. It's in tune with itself. It's getting close. It's almost there. Let's go a tiny bit more and see if that gets us more into that A. And again, okay, if you have a tune bot, you have a tool that's giving you visual feedback, that's awesome. There's no guesswork here. I think it's kind of fun doing the ear training game and like testing my ear training and seeing, okay, can I do this? But there are faster ways. Yes, I admit that. And so those of you who are gearheads, you want to get the cool stuff, by all means, do that. It might save you some time. Let's see how this sounds. There's our A. So we're slightly below an A, but sometimes what will happen, when you hit a drum really hard, it'll actually sharpen the pitch just a little bit. That's something to be aware of. I don't know how many microtones it's sharpening, how many cents it's sharpening if we get into the nerdy details of this, but when you hit really hard, that additional impact just causes the pitch of the drum to go up a tiny bit. So if you're going to be playing hard rim shots, and you know that you want it to be exactly an A, then go ahead and tune it to just a little bit below the A, which I think is where we're at now. So let's see if it jives with the rack tom. I think that works. We could maybe go a hair more, just a tiny bit. Yeah, that works. So we can check it here. Yep, and we've got full ringing because I took the jingly thing off, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. So now we've got the snare tuned to an A, the rack tom tuned to an A, and the floor tom, let's see, it's a fourth below that, which puts us at an E. Yeah, make sure I'm thinking straight. Yeah, this would be an E down here. As the snare mic falls off. Okay, so once you've got your snare tuned to the key of the song like that, let's say the song is in A, the snare is in A, that's even better than it being tuned to a 5, in my opinion. You heard that in my example. It works tuned to a 5, it works tuned to a 4. But I think 1 is the best. Tuning it to a 5 is second best. Tuning it to a 4 is third best. So let's say we're in the key of A. Okay, A is scale degree 1. If we wanted to tune it to a 5, we could go E. We could tune it to an E. If we wanted to go 4, we could tune it to D, and that would work. And so right now we've kind of got everything tuned, imagining we're playing a song in A. So that works great. And if you've done that, and if you're able to do that ahead of time and say, all right, we're in the key of the song, that ringiness might not be annoying, and you might be able to just let it ring out fully like that, and it could be totally fine. But let's say it's still a lot of ring, because this is a lot of ring. It's a long ring. We don't always want that much ring. Sometimes it's just a sound thing. It doesn't matter whether the ring sounds good or bad. It's now a pleasing to the ear ring, but maybe we just want less of it. And so that's where this thing comes in. So out of all of my stuff, I don't have a lot of stuff. I don't have a lot of fancy recording gear either. But this is the thing that I definitely get the most questions about. What is the thing on the snare? So it's just this, like it's a jingle bell. It has like little jingle bell things, little sleigh bell things that are all stuck together on these little metal beads. It's basically a bracelet. And so it's a solid object that rests on the snare head. I was inspired to do this. I had this thing lying around. I was inspired to do this because I was watching Aaron Sterling, and he's a fantastic session drummer in LA. You should look him up if you don't know who he is. Aaron Sterling is an expert in getting unique drum sounds. And he can get very good normal drum sounds. He can get very good ringy drum sounds, dead drum sounds, unique drum sounds. He gets hired for his ability to come up with really cool sounds. And something that he came up with, at least he was the first that I saw do this. I'm sure others have done it. He would put solid objects on the snare so that you get a little bit of an extra cool sound based on what it is that the microphone might pick up. That could be desirable. It could be cool. But what it does is it functions as a gate where when you hit the drum, this bounces up and then goes back down. Really tiny, but just long enough that you get the full tone, the full body and resonance of the drum, and then it just shortens the tone. If you load up a drum with moon gel, you're killing a lot of overtones. You're changing the sound. But with this, you're not changing the sound. You're just shortening the resonance, which is really cool. If you like the sound of a snare, you just don't want as much ring, find a solid object like this. It could be something like that. It could even be a little cardboard box of like paper clips. You could use car keys. I've used car keys before when in a pinch if I didn't have this with me. So many different things you can use. No right or wrong. Necklaces, jewelry, they all work great. But you can hear the obvious difference with this. So if I take it off, put it back on, massive difference, and it just shortens the tone. If you don't want a long ringiness, it gets rid of that long ringiness, but you still hear the note. You still hear that natural sound of this snare is just shorter, and that's what I love about this. So I encourage you to experiment with this. If you don't have your own jingly bracelet, just find any kind of old jewelry. Some car keys work fine. Just hard objects you can set on here. Hard so that they're not stuck to the head, so that they bounce off and then land again. So you get full resonance and then it functions like a gate. Now the third thing you can do, and this also works great on a gig or in a pinch, depending on what you're wanting to do, is use one of those big fat snares. You've probably seen those. I have one. I don't have it here with me. One of those big fat snare things you lay on your snare. Some of them have jingles on them. Some of them are plain. Some of them cover the whole head. Others parts of the head, so you get different levels of muffling. It's really cool what those do, and they'll also make the drum a little bit quieter, and they'll also lower the pitch a little bit. So if you needed to lower the pitch of your drum strategically, you can use it to do that. Or if you just need to go dead and you don't want to deal with ringiness, then we can do that too. So in this case, here's what the snare sounds like with nothing. Here's what it sounds like with this. Way different. It's like a Purple Rain snare sound suddenly. And so this whole concept is a great hack for if you're playing on a gig and you need to play a song like Purple Rain. And then you're going from that, you know, into songs that are much more upbeat and need a ringier sound. So it's cool being able to do things like that interchangeably and switch them around. So you can totally go that route with a big fat snare or just a drumhead cutout DIY option like this. And that will obviously get rid of ringiness. It'll also lower the pitch and deaden the snare significantly. And so that can work really well. Or number 4, you can go the Gaff Tape or Moongel route. I'm not a huge fan of Moongel, and this is something Aaron Sterling also talks about. I learned a lot about muffling from Aaron Sterling. You should definitely check him out. He talks about how if you're trying to reduce ringiness, and this is one of his reasons for using something like this, the more Moongel you put on a drum, all that does is kill overtones. But you still have the fundamental note, the main note you're hearing. So if you're trying to get rid of that note and it's annoying, and you're playing 30 songs and you can't have your snare tuned perfectly in the key of all of them, then the Moongel might not be your best option. It might be something like this. But that's what you'll notice will happen if we start putting, let's say, Gaff Tape on the drum. So right now it's wide open, ringy. We'll just put some tape on here. I'm gonna make some tape loops and stick them on. By the way, there's another video here on this channel going a lot more in depth about this, doing snare muffling, and you can check it out. We talk about the comparison of Moongel versus Gaff Tape and versus hard objects, which is better. But just to hear the difference here, I'm gonna stick it here near the middle. So it definitely makes it deader. You can still hear the fundamental note. What if we move it out here to the edge? You hear more of that note. So you can hear how if the tape is near the edge, it kills a lot of overtones that are happening out here, but you still hear the fundamental note. If you move the tape close to the center, of course, what you also have to do if you put the tape near the center, which most people aren't going to do because it's a little bit overkill, you're going to have to put additional tape on top of this tape loop or else it's going to hop and it's going to jump and it's going to move. Sometimes the thing about putting tape on a drum is that the tape can get loose and start flapping and create sounds that the microphones will pick up in the studio that maybe you're not noticing. I've had that happen to me before. That can be the pro of Moongel because it's quiet. If Moongel gets loose and hops around, it doesn't make a sound. But Moongel is generally more extreme. You can do more subtle stuff with the Gaff Tape, whereas Moongel, it makes bigger differences. And so a few Moongel will just completely deaden the drum, but you'll still have that fundamental note. And in my opinion, that's just not a desirable sound. Again, it depends on the song, it depends on what I'm playing. I would rather use this thing so that I have that full sound. It just has more life to it, more brightness to it. I think it sounds really cool. If I wanted the dead, more mellow sound, okay, that's where the tape, the head cutout, the big fat snare, all of that comes into play. The Gaff Tape and Moongel can help us get there. So it all depends on what sound you want. Now, there's a fifth thing that you need to make sure you're doing here that will also help with reducing undesirable ringiness from a snare. And that fifth thing is hit the snare well. So if you're hitting the snare inconsistently, like you're playing and you're like, you can hear how you get a million different amounts of ringiness depending on where you hit. That was me. When I was sloppy high school drummer, my snare sounded terrible, and I was loading it with Moongel. I was putting Moongel all over it because I was like, oh, this is like ringing terribly. Knew nothing about drum tuning, nothing about hitting it in the center, believe it or not, which sounds so fundamental and important, but sometimes we don't think about the simple, obvious things. If you're hitting all over the place, you're probably going to get annoying ringiness, and there might even be slight pitch variations. And if you're hitting at different velocities, there will also be slight pitch variations, because remember, if we hit harder, it sharpens the tone just a bit, and we hit softer, we get more of the pure original tone of the drum. So if you're sloppy with where you're hitting and how hard you're hitting, who knows what you're going to get, and it's not going to sound good. So practice hitting the snare in the center, whether you're doing just, center or rim shots. And if you are doing rim shots, just a quick rim shot tip. So you can look at my sticks and see where they're splintering from rim shots. They're splintering exactly at that midpoint, halfway up the stick. Now, most drumsticks are 16 inches, so that midpoint is going to be 8 inches up. If we line that up, 8 inches out onto a 14-inch snare puts us an inch north of center, right? If we do the math, a 14-inch snare, 7-inch radius, that's going to put us 7 inches, but if we want to be 8 inches in the middle of the 16-inch stick, I know this is a lot of numbers, then we actually have to land the stick just north of center. And you might find that feels better. If you're playing rim shots, there is some grace with how far you can go from the center. If you go an inch north, it'll still sound full of attack, but if you go more than that, you'll start to get the ringiness. I'll show you what I mean. So watch here as I play. Okay, those last 3 hits, I did about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches north of center. The first few were about 1 inch north of center. So you could hear the difference, just moving a little bit outside that radius. It's like suddenly you're out of that nice comfort zone and you start to get a lot of ring, which might be okay. Maybe you want that, but you've got to be consistent in it. Otherwise, throughout the song, it's like, and so you're going to get all these different sounds, which is just going to feel sloppy. And so that's so important that you're hitting consistently. And how do we do that? We practice doing it over and over again. Hold your stick down here near the button, so you've got lots of stick, lots of throw here, and just practice moving consistently. We got plenty of lessons here on the channel about grip and motion that can help you out with this for sure. But just practice doing it over and over again and listening to what you're doing. Record yourself, go back, watch, listen, and hear how am I doing. So hey, these steps should help you a bunch. If you start with step number 1 of tuning to the key of the song, that's massive. And then play around with what kind of muffling you're using. But most importantly, maybe second most important, I don't know, it's debatable. Tuning it to the right note that's very important. We'll say second most important is hitting it well, but that's critical across the board, no matter the key of the song, no matter what you're doing. So hey, 6 songs to check out that have ringy snares. And actually, a lot of these, you don't listen to them and think, oh, those are ringy snares. But when you listen to them, you'll hear a note, and you'll hear that note's relationship to the key of the song. So here are the 6 songs. YouTube music copyright laws, I can't play them for you, of course. I wish I could. But I'm going to list them off for you. You can go look these up. If you grew up in church and playing in church like I did when I was a high school student drummer, you may remember this old song called Forever by Chris Tomlin. The snare on that recording is so ringy, and I think it's annoying. So remember, if we want a ringy snare to sound nice in the key of the song, then it needs to be a 1, a 4, or a 5. Ideally a 1. When the snare is ringing a 1, you almost don't hear it. It just blends in perfectly. But it can also do that when it's a 5, and it can sound nice as a 4 as well. So in this song, Forever by Chris Tomlin, you can go back and listen to this recording. It sounds to me like the snare is slightly sharper than a 1. And it sounds bad to me. We're getting close to that sharp 1, which is awful, because the sharp 1 is never in the key. If we're in the key of A, we're not going to hear a B flat or an A sharp anywhere in the song, unless it's just a bizarre song. We're not going to deal with that. And so to me, it sounds bad. It's almost like, the thing is, they had to have been paying attention to this. This had to have been intentional. Obviously, this recording turned out the way they wanted it to turn out. I just don't like it. It's almost like they tuned the snare to a 1 and got it where it was roughly a 1, but maybe it was a hair above a 1. But then he started hitting and going really hard. And hitting harder and harder, which then raised the pitch a little bit. Here's our pitch when we're hitting soft. You can start hearing a slightly higher note, plus you're getting a whole bunch more overtones when you hit really hard. So I think it's almost like what happened was they tuned it like a 1-ish, but as he was hitting harder and you're getting all these overtones, the pitch that we end up perceiving is slightly above a 1. Just a little above a 1. I think it sounds bad. Go listen to it. Tell me if you agree. Here's some more songs though. Where the Streets Have No Name by U2. So this one's really cool. Any of you U2 nerds out there who know the details of this recording will know this better than me, but it sounds like at the beginning, Larry Mullen Jr. is playing on a snares off snare. He's going like... basically doing that, and then later on in the song, it's more of a... I don't know exactly what drums he's using, but basically, it sounds like he's on a snares off snare, and that snares off snare pitch is a scale degree 5 in the song. When you listen to it, you can hear the 1 of the song, the key of the song, and it's down a 4th. And so it sounds really nice. It makes more sense than if it were a 1. I think in that case, I'm a big fan of tuning it to scale degree 5. So let's say, I don't know the key of Where the Streets Have No Name. Let's say it's in the key of C. That means the snare is tuned to a G, and it sounds great. By the way, a tip that a friend of mine gave for identifying the key of a song. He said, you know how punk rock songs always end, and then there's like a little vocal line at the end. There might be something like, tonight, tonight. There's like a little vocal thing that happens at the end. His example was, tonight, 7-1. So if you hear that vocal line, if you hear that in your head, imagine just cut the song off. Okay, hear that line. Boom, boom. It ends nice and peacefully and consonantly and sounds nice. That is scale degree 1. That's the key of the song, where it resolves, what feels like home base. And so then you can check it on a piano app or on a tuner app. And so that's how you find out the key of the song. We could talk more about that. Maybe we'll save that for another lesson. But anyways, so in Where the Streets Have No Name, that snares off snare is tuned to a scale degree 5. I'm pretty sure it's a snare and not a tom, but later on he's moving around the kit and whatnot, and you hear the snares come on. Now, another really great record to check out is John Mayer live in LA, Where the Light Is, live at the Nokia Theater. One of my favorite records of all time. You may have heard me talk about it. There's so much that we can learn from this album, from playing drums to playing well with a band and creating groove and what is groove. So many things we can nerd out on. This is an amazing record. Go listen to it if you haven't listened to it. But also we can learn about drum tuning. It's fitting, right? It's such a great record that of course we can learn about snare tuning from this album. Vultures. John Mayer live, Vultures. It feels like that snare is tuned to the key of the song, to scale degree 1. Now Vultures has a weird chord progression. It's debatable what the key is, but that doesn't matter. It feels like it's in the key of the song. It's either a 1 or a 4 or a 5. And that snare is tuned to a low E. It's this low snare, like this low beefy snare sound that has a note to it. Usually when we think low, we think, oh, we got to go dead because then the ring gets annoying, right? But as we hear on this John Mayer Live in LA record, these great beefy snare sounds actually have a little bit of a note to them, which is really fascinating. That's not to say there's no muffling. They've probably got something on there, but they don't have something like this. Maybe there's some tape, I don't know. But you hear how there's a note to that drum, and it gives it this body and this fullness. So Vultures, that snare that happens to be tuned to an E, feels like it's in the key of the song. Another song from that record, I Don't Trust Myself with Loving You. Same snare. It's played by a different drummer, because there's 2 drummers on the record. It's Steve Jordan playing for the John Mayer Trio stuff, and then J.J. Johnson playing for the full band stuff. But you can hear that they're using that same snare. And then I Don't Trust Myself with Loving You is the same snare tuned to an E, which happens to be a scale degree 3. Now 3 isn't one of our ideal notes, but it works. And in a live scenario like that, the drum check had to go through and think, okay, what are all the keys of the songs? What's the one note I can tune the snare to that's going to work in all of these songs so that we're not having to take it off and retune it and so on. And so that's what they did, and that worked. Slow Dancing in a Burning Room. Snare is still an E, it's still that same note, but now it's a scale degree 1. And so it sounds really nice. Slow Dancing in a Burning Room. The snare rings in the key of the song. Then there's also another song on the record. This is Steve Jordan playing. Good Love Is on the Way. The snare, now on this one, it's a higher pitch snare. There's a couple different snares you hear on the album, and this one is the high snare. It's cranked up high. It's a high E, which happens to be a 5 in Good Love Is on the Way. So it sounds really nice. And so it's so interesting when you start listening for this stuff, you notice, oh, that's why that snare sounds so good on the record. It's not just that it's tuned well and it's played well, but it's that it's tuned to the key of the song. It's not just that it's tuned to sound good with itself, like it's not tuned to its ideal key. It's tuned to the key of the song, and that's why it sounds so good. And there's so much care and attention put into this stuff on great records why shouldn't we put this kind of care and attention into our drum sound? What if we did this? What if you even, let's say you're a beginner, what if as a beginner you start paying attention to this and you start playing gigs and you're like, this snare sounds so ringy and obnoxious, but you find out, hey, we're playing a bunch of songs in G. Guitar players like G and A and E and D, keys like that. So what if, okay, we find what the most represented note is and I tune my snare to this and suddenly, hey, it sounds really nice for most of this rehearsal, most of this jam session, most of this Sunday morning, most of this gig. And you realize, hey, I'm feeling like a real drummer and I sound nice, which is pretty cool. So, hey, here's what will happen if you take action on this. I know I've given you a lot of info today, but hopefully challenge your thinking a little bit on the whole ringy snare thing, because this whole principle challenged my thinking. So I wanted to challenge yours too. You're going to go from ringiness being an annoyance and an inconvenience to ringiness becoming a pleasing part of your drum sound. You're going to learn to love your drum sound and love that ringiness because your snare is a melodic instrument that resonates and can resonate pleasingly with the music. And if you get real nerdy with it, you can tune the toms to the key too. And so everything has this nice melodic feel. Drums are melodic instruments. We've kind of just been allowed to tune them however we want to and end up with whatever happens. But what if we do tune them to the key of the song? And we're becoming a melodic participant in the song, which is pretty awesome. So hey, to wrap up that story, I was telling earlier back at the beginning of the video when I told you I got 2 songs into a Sunday set playing at church. And my snare suddenly had this awful ring. And it was like, where is this coming from? Well, that morning I had my snare tuned to a G, and the first 2 songs in the set were in G. But then we go to this third song, the oddball song that happens to be in E, and I didn't have time to mess around with my tuning before the set to change things because there's so many things I could have done, but didn't have time to do it. And we start that song that's in E, and suddenly my G snare doesn't sound so good. It's now a minor 3. It's now a flat 3, a flat scale degree 3, which is not in the key when you're in a major key song. We now have a half-step clash that's happening here, which is just as bad as a tritone. So the whole time through that third song, it's like, man, this snare sounded so good in the first 2 songs, and now it sounds terrible. If you've ever noticed that, if that has ever happened to you, then I congratulate you because you have a better ear than I do, and that is awesome that you're noticing those things and that you're noticing, hey, my snare sounded good in this song, but not in this one. Why is that? This whole thing today is your answer, and this is something I've been working on getting better at myself and figuring out, okay, if we've got songs in G but also in E, what is the better note to be tuning to? Maybe a D? Let's see, we could tune to a B. B would work, and so we think about what are notes that are in both of those keys so we can be more strategic so those kinds of things don't happen. But it's so fascinating how when your snare rings in the key of the song, you don't notice it, and then suddenly you go to a song where now the key clashes and you do notice it, and it's like, what is going on? So hey, before you go, I want you to leave a comment. Tell me which of today's methods is your favorite that you're going to go and use on your snare right now. Are you going to tune to the key of the song, a 1, a 4, or a 5? Are you going to get better at identifying the key of the song? Are you going to get a tune by that? That could help you out with this. What about using a solid object to muffle? What about using a big fat snare or a head cutout or gaff tape or moon gel? And what about hitting well? Maybe that's what you need to work on, being intentional about that. But what is your favorite method that we've talked about today you're going to go out and use? Hey, I hope today's lesson has been valuable for you. I know we've covered a lot, but like I said, I hope I've challenged your thinking as this whole philosophy and principle has challenged mine. Know that whatever the case, wherever you're at, you can do this. Stay non-glamorous. I'll see you on the next lesson.